Good morning, everyone. On behalf of BITES, the System and Analytics Club of IIM Shillong, we welcome you all to this engaging session as part of the Business Leadership Summit 2024. This year, under the overarching theme, Building a Future-Ready India, Business Leadership and Strategy Autonomy in a Shifting Global Landscape, we focus on how India can harness its data revolution to lead in business and policy innovation.
Our sub-theme for today, India's data revolution, harnessing behavioral analytics for business and policy, emphasizes transformative power of understanding human behavior through data. From healthcare to e-commerce, behavioral analytics is reshaping industries and enabling India to emerge as a global leader.
We would like to introduce our panelists for the day. It's a privilege to introduce Dr. Anish Agarwal, the Global Head of Data and Analytics at Dr. Reddy's Laboratories. Sir has been a key pillar in driving data-driven transformations at Dr. Reddy's and currently leads the development of innovative analytic solutions to support strategic decision-making. Sir's illustrious career spans over 23 years, including leadership roles at NatWest Group, Clifford Chance and Vertex Data Science, overseeing large-scale analytics, operational intelligence, and market strategy. Recognized for his contributions to the field, he was named among the 2023 Global Top 100 Innovators in Data and Analytics by Corneum Global Intelligence in October 2023. We welcome you, sir.
Thank you.
We are pleased to introduce Mr. George Joseph, the Head of Analytics and Insights at Uber, leading the APAC Analytics and Insights team for community operations. He has been a driving force in enhancing customer experiences and optimizing operational efficiency across Uber's global operations. With more than 8 years of experience at Uber, Sir has successfully solved numerous business challenges, harnessing the power of AI, machine learning, and predictive analytics. Before Uber, he held key roles at Snapdeal and Bharat Petroleum, where he contributed to operational excellence and customer satisfaction through data-driven insights. We welcome you, sir.
Thanks.
Now, we are excited to introduce Mr. Manan Chandna, an alumnus of IIM Shillong from the 2012 to 2014 batch and the Chief Product Officer at Honeywell MMS, where he leads product management, innovation, and marketing for the MMS division.
Thanks.
With over a decade of experience in product management, Sir brings a wealth of insight and leadership in PM strategies across Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, and smart technologies domain. Before Honeywell MMS, he served as the Director of AI and IoT product ventures at Bosch Global Software Technologies, where he scaled high-growth technology products in areas such as sustainability, smart home, and asset performance. We welcome you, sir.
Thanks.
We are delighted to have Professor Parijat Upadhyay, sir, as our esteemed moderator for today's session. Sir is an Associate Professor of Information System and Analytics at IIM Shillong, specializing in digital transformation, design thinking, and systemic innovation. An alumnus of Symbiosis and XLRI Jamshedpur, Professor Upadhyay, sir, has taught at leading institutions like IIMT Ghaziabad and IIMT Nagpur. With over 20 published research papers in top international journals, he has received several awards, including the Literati Award by Emerald Publishing in the year 2020. Welcome you, sir.
Today's session will focus on exploring how India's data revolution is harnessing behavioral analytics to drive innovation in business and policy. Behavioral analytics is enabling businesses to understand customer journeys, personal experiences, and optimize operations. We would like our moderator, Professor Parijat Upadhyay, sir, to steer the conversation and panel discussion ahead.
Thank you.
Yeah, good morning, all of you. And we have esteemed panelists out here. So we're just having a discussion over a cup of tea that how we're going to take this forward. Now, today morning, while having my morning cup of tea, I was just going through an article by Accenture. And the title reads like this, that what might have brought you here will not take you further. Right? So basically, means be it Uber or Dr. Reddy's or basically Honeywell or any other organization that we are aware of, right? All of them are iconic and very successful in their own rights, and they have made a big name in their industry as well. But the question today is that we find ourselves at a crossroad crossroad in the sense that a lot of things are going in and around us. So we cannot possibly say that we can act in silos, or basically we are immune to the international world or the business ecosystem in which we operate. So that's the reason. So when you talk about Dr. Reddy's or Uber or basically Honeywell as well, so they are having the market dynamics, they have to fend themselves. So the way we want to start the discussion is something like this, and I think we have just had a discussion on that. So we'd look at that, how data has played a role in their journey so far, and whether what kind of data-driven strategies they have been adapting so far, right, as on date. Thereafter, in the middle tier, we'll get into that how the exogenous factors is actually creating, or they are actually forcing some kind of a disruptions, be it in the form of a strategic compliance, be it in the form of an industry disruption, be it in the form of some international global events that are happening, right? How these are likely to, in near future, maybe next 2 to 3 years, are going to affect their kind of business. And finally, we are going to get into the crystal gazing part of it, where we are looking at that, okay, fine, how you are using data as a strategic tool and a strategic resource to build your future business models. So that's going to be our format for today's roundtable. And we had a discussion in that regard itself. So the format that we're going to follow is that we leave to each panelist, wherein he can talk about, take you through that, what their respective companies have been doing for taking data as a strategic resource for the way where they find themselves right now. So where they have come. And then we get into, so every panelists get around 10 minutes time to put forward their views, what the company has been doing and how their industry has been shaping up. So once that is done, we may take some questions from your side, right? Or I might also have 1 or 2 clarifications or questions from my side as well. Then we'll try to get into this, that how the exogenous factors are playing a role, or what is it that they find in the next 2 to 3 years, be it in the form of climate change or basically carbon footprint or basically outsourcing or basically resourcing or some many other question that you might be having, right? How those are actually playing a role and impacting their business models. And finally, we'll get into the crystal gazing part, right? So if that is okay?
Absolutely.
So we'll start off with Dr. Agarwal.
Sure. Thank you very much, Professor Upadhyay. Well, I was pondering over the overall title and the theme for this conversation, which is largely on the behavioral analytics. While there could be a lot many examples which we can bring on the table from the organizations where each one of us work from, I was thinking we should also take an opportunity to bring in a real life example, an example which will resonate well with majority of us. And for the individuals with whom it doesn't resonate, there's definitely some homework for you guys to do. So how many of you have seen the movie Sholay? By show of hands. I still don't see all the hands going up, but for those who have not raised their hands, this is your weekend task. You should definitely watch the movie Sholay. So if you look at how the overall story was orchestrated for, and there was one character which was Thakur, right? Now let's take the behavioral attributes of each and every character in the movie Sholay. Thakur can be defined as a strategic leader, someone who actually had a strategy in mind to combat, Gabbar. Then came Gabbar, right? Gabbar can be defined as an aggressive leader or a disruptor. And then there were 2 characters which were more famous, Jay and Viru, right? They were team players. And then there was another set which was the villagers, passives. They seldom believed in what Thakur said, and they were always afraid of what Gabbar did to them. Now here's how Thakur intelligently looked at behavioral analytics and behaviors of each and every character and knit a winning strategy. So he actually understood the attributes of Jay and Viru, team players, right? They can actually think, act and react quickly. And then he also looked at Gabbar's behavior patterns. What does he do? Where does he stay? Where does he source his supplies from? And that's where he'd actually set up Jay and Viru to source and procure guns. And there was this famous song as well. And then the villagers, right? Where he brought the villagers gradually into the fold to support the entire winning game. So if you look at all these 3 aspects, there's definitely an importance for behavior analytics where we need to look at the attributes, the planning, and the execution. So coming back from Bollywood to the real world example, as Professor Upadhyay said, I work for a pharma company called Dr. Reddy's. Within the pharma domain, there are several attributes where which actually plays a pivotal role for our data. And without data, we may not be as successful as we are today. And so it applies similarly to many of our peers in the market as well. But before I actually talk about the overall realm of data, let me take an opportunity to break down the operations or the modus operandi of a pharmaceutical organization. On the face of it, majority of individuals or us will understand a pharma company as manufacturers of drugs. There is a medicine which has got a name or tag of a company, and which is prescribed by doctors. You source from a pharmacy. But if we actually look at what happens behind the scene, it's a complex set of operations. So right from the time when we decide that there is a possible therapy for which a drug needs to be manufactured, that's where R&D plays a pivotal role. And for R&D to be successful to discover or invent a new drug, they need huge volume of data. In today's context, there is something called clinical trials which are conducted. Clinical trials help aggregate the patient's characteristic, attribute, outcomes of the medicines, whether it's placebo effect or it's the actual effect of the medicine. That's the first part. Now, let's say once the R&D team comes into play, okay, this is the new molecule drug we have discovered, they will then pass it on to the manufacturing setup. Now, for a manufacturing setup to manufacture that drug, they need to look at the supply chain, because there will be organizations from where they need to source the raw materials from. Once the raw materials are sourced, it actually goes to the production line, which then produces something called finished goods, which means the medicine is ready. Once the medicine is ready, then again comes the supply chain, where they need to look at whether the drugs needs to be shipped by air shipment, sea shipment, or land shipment, and where it all has to happen. And even before the shipment, there is a function called quality. Every drug has to be quality tested. Once the drug is shipped, it then goes to distributors. So there's a whole ecosystem of distributors who then interact with the pharmacists to supply the drug to the local pharmacies. That's the first side of the story. The second is, how do we actually sell our products? In country like India, we cannot advertise. We cannot put big advertisements in the newspapers or even in social media for encouraging someone to buy our drugs. That's where the entire ecosystem of medical reps come into play, where they interact with the doctors. On an average, an MR gets maximum 5 minutes to interact with the doctor and position the drug. That, we've come up with a new drug, let's say for seasonal cough and cold. Please prescribe this to your patients. And this is where the power of data comes in. So let's now talk about where all this data come into play. R&D as an example, we've been able to use data for last 10 years. And I can give you an example, we've recently gone live with it, is something called AI-enabled drug discovery, where we today have a library of more than 4 billion compounds. And if we look at the characteristic and reaction of these compounds for a particular therapy, we can actually synthesize a new compound in a synthetic manner in less than 5 minutes. A process which would normally take months and years if we were to do this process in a physical chemistry lab. That's the value of data that actually adds value in R&D. Then comes supply chain. For us to be effective in procuring raw materials, data helps us to understand the efficacy of each and every supplier to supply the raw material to us within a stipulated amount of time. From a manufacturing setup, even if we need to manufacture the drugs, we need to make sure the manufacturing lines, they're adequately placed so that they're not overwhelmed, but they are not overpushed, or there's no overproduction. Quality, in a way, plays an important role from a data standpoint. In an event a batch is failed, the data which is underlying each and every finished good, which is the raw material, the supplier ecosystem, actually helps the quality to identify the root cause of the failure and remediate that particular batch. And then comes the distributor ecosystem. Which distributor is more effective? Which city has requirement of which particular drug for which particular therapy? And likewise, we've used data extensively to improvise the MR and the doctor engagement by means of digitizing the process. Today, our MR doesn't really have to worry about which doctor he or she needs to visit. It's just by means of a simple app. The MR has to log in the morning, and he or she will see predefined recommendations. You need to visit this doctor for this particular therapy. these are the drugs for Dr. Reddy's which are mapped to this particular therapy. And underlying that, there is an automated generating video presentation, which all the MR has to do is hit the play button. That's it. Now, what happens within those 5 minutes is when the MR is interacting with the doctor, there is an audio to text conversion that happens of the interaction of the doctor, which actually then gives a gradient score of the possibility of the doctor recommending a medicines. Now, in an event, the algorithm captures words like yes, maybe, okay. The underlying score is impacted. And that's what actually helps us to aggregate the possibility of a particular doctor supporting or recommending our drug. So these are a few of the examples, but there are many more examples I can talk about. But I'll hand it over to George to share his experience.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Dr. Anish, he explained us what behavioral analytics is by quoting a pretty good example. So I think most of it, at least majority of us here, was able to relate with the movie and understand what behavioral analytics is, right? So what I would potentially do for the first 2 to 3 minutes is try to explain behavioral analytics a bit more from the technical side on how it actually plays out in a company or a space that I'm in, so that you could connect with this concept much more. And post that, I'll move on to the data strategy part, which would help you understand how like a Uber or a ride sharing or a tech-based company uses data in its day-to-day work, right? So let's try to understand behavioral analytics a bit more. All right, so most of the traditional companies that you see, or maybe most of the companies, say, until a good 5-10 years back, used to rely on data, but the reason that they rely on data was for certain quantitative metrics. Now, what are quantitative metrics? So for any company to operate, there are certain KPIs, right? The key performance indicators, etc., which any individual in any company would be responsible for, right? So there will be certain KPIs that the CEO would be responsible for. It gets sort of trickled down and it reaches every department. So every department would be run by certain set of KPIs that they are responsible for. Now those KPIs gets translated into metrics, and those are quantitative metrics, and you track those metrics. You build those great dashboards, you track those metrics. And what does this metrics tell you? It tells you exactly what is happening. Right, that what exactly is happening in your business or in that particular department at that particular point of time is being answered by the quantitative metrics, which is directly connected to your KPIs, right? So we have an answer to what is happening at this point of time. Now, the next question which comes in is, okay, we know something is happening and we know how the numbers are moving, but why is it happening? Or how is it happening? Or more specifically, the why part, like, why is it happening? And it's very different. Like, different companies look into the why part very differently, right? So there is this funny concept called the HIPPO, which means that, the highest paid person's opinion. So generally, you get into a meeting room, you meet with, the different POCs from different departments. You see certain metrics having certain movements, and then you really do not know, like, why is the metric moving in this particular manner? Then there would be one individual in the room who ended up being the the highest paid person. So he would say, oh, okay, my intuition is that it's probably happened because of this, right? So the team agrees to it. Okay, he is the senior boss, so why not agree to it? So we just follow based upon the intuition this particular person had. And that's what tend to happen, or that's what tended to happen until say, several years back. Then the entire analytics world, when it was exposed to big data, and there's considerable amount of information which is coming in, that was a point when we were in a position to answer the why. And how do you answer the why? That has got to do quite a lot with qualitative data analysis, right? So far what we spoke of is predominantly the quantitative data analytics, the what part. The why part is answered by the qualitative data analysis. Now the entire behavioral analytics comes to play, right? And how does behavioral analytics comes to play? Let's look at any e-commerce firm, right? End of the day, you want to drive conversion, meaning end of the day, you want your customers to click the buy button. Now, if you want your customers to click buy button, you know that you have traffic, you have, session volume, you have sort of, all the quantitative metrics are looking great, but, people are not clicking buy button. How do you figure out, why are people not clicking buy button, right? And that's where the entire behavioral analytics comes to play, because now with certain behavioral analytics tools, you are able to actually figure out the why part of it. Why are people not clicking the buy button, right? And there are several tools that is in use for behavioral analytics. It includes basic tools like, the entire section recording. Like say, for instance, you can go back and replay how a particular user interacted with your app. So when you replay and see it for yourself, how does a user move on from one page to the other? How does did the person scroll? Did the person click on certain sections of your web page or your app? You get to understand why the person is behaving in that particular manner when interacting with your product, right? And that has been really helpful, because I did interact with some of the people, some of the students in here who said they are keen to move on to product analytics world, right? This really helps you as a product manager, because you are now able to figure out why the person is behaving in a particular manner when he or she is using the product that you've built, right? And there are also heat maps which are available right now, which again is a tool that is used heavily on the behavioral analytics side. Heat maps tells you exactly, enables you to look at the different parts of your web page or an app, and tells you which section are people scrolling or which section people are clicking quite a lot, so that you can figure out what is that is missing in your app, or what is that additional feature that you would have to potentially bring on to your app or a product, so that you could use this behavioral analytics to improve whatever and quantitative metrics that you have in place. So that's a beauty of behavioral analytics. I'll just take a minute and potentially explain a scenario that we try to use this within my domain. So on customer experience side, generally any company, this is not Uber specific, any tech company would love our customer issues to be solved directly on the app, right? Any tech company for that matter would not be really keen to have the customer reach out to a call center or a back-end agent, and agent spending his time, effort to solve for it, because it involves huge cost, right? So we want solutions to be provided directly through an online interface, which is the help center that you see in pretty much any e-commerce websites or apps that you would have used. Now, there are several instances when we feel that we have designed the help center page and in a very intuitive manner that it is easy to use for each and every customer, but still we might find that customers are not using it the way that we have designed it for them. Instead, they are reaching out to the support agent or some other channels of support that exist. And that is a place, what we tend to do is we tend to look into the section recordings. We can replay the section recordings and see why the customer did not reach the information he or she was looking for. And it's so beautiful that you figure out that it might be really a minor miss on your FAQ page. Probably you have not answered that question right away. Instead, it might be buried deep below some multiple sections in your web page, and that resulted in customer having to reach out to you because he or she dropped out after a particular stage. So the heat map helps in that case, or the section recording, which I said, helps in that case. And that's the beauty of learning or understanding the behavioral side of how the customer interacts with your tool, so that you are able to add value as a product manager. As I'm calling out product managers because I believe some of you are keen on that particular domain. So that's the value that you could add, and that's an sort of a real example which you guys might be able to relate to. Now, moving on to the other question with regards to sort of strategy around data and how does Uber as a company use data. Uber is a marketplace model, right? We have mobility business, we have delivery business. We don't have delivery business in India, but we have it elsewhere. So it's a pure marketplace model where 2 or 3 players interact with the marketplace. So any marketplace model, you would be successful only if you optimize the marketplace. right? You cannot be the sole winner of the marketplace model, right? Uber as a company is a facilitator of marketplace. You cannot be the only winner in this marketplace. You need the rider to be a winner. You need the driver to be a winner. And how do you make both parties winner? That is by creating the perfect marketplace where it is optimized for the success of all the parties that is involved, right? And for that, you need to rely on data considerably a lot. And my company, at least, the industry that I'm from, data is pretty much in forefront of the entire decision-making process. And when I say decision-making process, it can be as simple as changing the refund and appeasement policy, right? Even a $1 increase on a refund and appeasement policy will not be made if it is not backed by data. And how do we get it backed by data? It's through experiments. And what are experiments? Experiments in its basic form are nothing but A/B testing. So pretty much any changes that you see with regards to policy or with regards to product that happens on the platform is purely done by a backend A/B test or a backend experiment with proper statistically valid outcome or impact that would have to be then represented in a forum which gets accepted, and then the changes would be made. So any decisions, any changes that you see, even the smallest of smallest changes, it is made purely data driven, and that's the beauty, and that's the value and the contribution data has in a company like Uber, which is in the tech space. Yeah.
Thanks. So the good part about going last is you can pick up pointers from each other and then try to summarize that. But I really like the Sholay example, and I'll pick on that a little bit. I think there was, on TV, there was the biggest display of live behavioral analytics last week. I'm sure some of you watched it. In IIM, they don't give you so much time, so you would have followed it. Any guesses what I'm talking about? IPL auction, yes. So the IPL auction was nothing but, of course, a lot of performance analytics, but also a lot of behavioral analytics in terms of, outthinking the other team on what they are going to do. Really trying to understand at what place do you need what kind of a player and what kind of a strategy and what kind of a team, right? And that's the role of data really, right? If you look at kingmakers traditionally, they've always been the people who have come up with the right data at the right time. You hear about IAS being the biggest, policy controllers in the country. And that is because they have the right data for the right policy and the, right occasion for the ministers to take that decision, right? So data enablement for decision making has been going on for generations. It's nothing new that technology is really trying to do, right? Now, if you continue the sport example, sports today is becoming so much more data oriented. If you look at what happened in the World Cup, right? A World Cup final, we looked at what is the best condition that can make India win, and we went overboard on data. That's the other side of what can happen when you over analyze a certain condition and try to control and moderate it. But in terms of any Premier League team scouting for talents, in terms of any cricketing match happening, it's all about what is the behavior of this particular player against, and what's his weakness, what is his strength, what should we do. So it's almost like sometimes people question that, hey, where's the national intelligence gone? It's being told, right? You see a Ricky Ponting bidding at the bid table, but it actually at the end of the interview is crediting the data analyst in the team, because it's all about what information was provided to that person to be able to take that decision, right? Now, whatever George and Dr. Anish mentioned, right, in terms of from a very behavioral consumer point of view, so you've already got the feeling and the gist of how consumer analytics and behaviorals for consumers are driven. I'll try to take it in a different dimension a little bit. I come from a B2B domain, which is business to business. That means we help other businesses achieve their goals better, right? So whatever Dr. Anish spoke about in terms of data helping on their supply chain, on their product lines, on maintaining the right environment, and also helping their MRs to become smarter is what technology providers like ours do, to enable tools and methods to be able to do that, right? Now, in terms of behavioral analytics, it's not only about the consumer, it's also about a few different dimensions that we look at. What are these dimensions? These are typically in an industrial, I'll take an example of an industrial environment, right? In industrial environment, digital transformation has always been about men, material, machine, and methods if you add the processes to it, right? So how do you make your men, like the MR that he mentioned about, smarter and more efficient is always the goal that we try to drive with data. How do you make sure that the supply chains and the materials are just in time or following the right methods to have limited wastages and the right quality, right? Is the other thing that you look at. Machines intrinsically can talk today, right? They're becoming smarter by the day, that you get a lot of data out of machines that is helping in terms of enabling decision making and also better process controls and things like that. And of course, the methods and processes which are getting smarter with the Gen AI methods, with a lot of data polling and all, that is coming up, right? But if you look at the, while this is theory, and I'll give you a little more of that before getting into examples. If you look at digital transformation or data analytics or where it is used in any organization, right? And George mentioned about key KPIs, right? So what are the KPIs for any organization when they're getting into a database change or digital transformation? Typically, you can summarize into the first principles. Everything in the world can be solved with first principles. What is the first principle of a company? That you have to make money. So digital transformation or data transformation happening today is one about creating more revenue streams. That how traditional product companies like ours are now getting into service business models, marketplaces, right? How products are getting smarter. That means today, for example, if you buy a Excite battery for your inverter, you may know before your warranty has expired that there's a problem and you would want to replace it or want to service it. This is and have an aftermarket service model established out of there, right? Which is nothing but a new revenue stream for a typical battery manufacturer that has emerged, right? So data is playing that role, or digital transformation is playing that role to help you generate new revenue streams which are not possible without the advent of data as such, right? The other thing that, the other pointer in that triangle is the bottom line, right? So it's about the top line and the bottom line, right? So on the bottom line, it's a fairly simple and straightforward, that how do you drive to have a better bottom line? That means you have to save on costs. That means you have to make your processes and everything around it more efficient, right? Efficiency is what is the big mantra for any industrial company that we keep talking about, whether it is industrial IoT, whether it is industry 4.0, whether it is smart buildings or anything, where you're saying that how can I do more for less? How can I deploy efficiency measures, better processes, better tools, and things like that to be able to attack a much wider problem by doing much lesser, right? And this is where all industrial technologies come into play, and that's where the men, material, machine logic plays out, right? So these are two fundamental themes that any company would look at data for. The third thing is to enable all of this, you need a lot of transformation and change, right? Because companies are traditionally working in a particular method or a particular dimension, and now you have to use a lot of data to enable a lot of decision making and this change, right? So the third biggest role that data plays in organizations internally is to actually drive that change management, right? How do we change our processes, change our tools, change our methods really to drive that change and change management? And the fourth thing that is close to my heart, really, which I drive as well, is a buzzword today in the industry, but it has a far deeper meaning, according to me, which is sustainability, right? Sustainability is a buzzword very close to IIM Shillong as well. And all of you relate to the Suscons and Kakoti sir and things that keep happening at IIM Shillong. But sustainability is not only about the ESG goals and carbon capture, which all of us as industrialists look at, but it's also about business sustainability, right? How do you ensure that you meet all of these goals with sustainable best practices, that your brand is represented in that format, right? And if you look at these 3 or 4 dimensions, these are the changes that data is making in the world for organizations to transform. These are the transformational metrics, I believe, that's happening in the world, right? Now, in terms of my journey and industrial companies, I've primarily worked with 3 industrial giants, Schneider, Bosch, and Honeywell now. At Honeywell, I think we follow 3 mega trends in all the things that we do, right? One of the mega trend that we look at is the future of aviation. So everything that happens in an cockpit or an aerospace or an aeroplane inside that is governed by companies like ours. Yeah. The second thing that we look at is automation. We are traditionally an automation and controls company that is already bringing automation and efficiency in every industrial or building world over the years, right? And the third really thing that we are investing in is future of energy transition, right? Which is sustainability, new materials, sustainable practices, advanced materials, and things like that, right? So if you look at all of these three megatrends, these three megatrends are quite relevant for any industry that we look at, or all our customers that we look at. And data is playing a very big role in governing all of that. I'll give you a few examples. I come from the product management background. George led to Prodman. Some of you wanted to, come in this field. From a product management perspective, for any product today, by default, any product launched from 2020s is by default connected. I know that you may say a toothpaste is not connected today, but it will be, yeah. Or very, very simple consumer products are not connected yet, but the science or the behavior behind it is already connected, right? But today, if you look at your living room, your TV is connected, your washing machines are getting smarter, you have use cases or prototypes of other consumer devices getting smarter. So especially for companies like ours, which are industrial in nature or B2B in nature, it's very important that every product that we launch is connected. And when we say connected, it means that it generates data, it throws data, and we are able to use that data to understand the use of the product, understand the life cycle of the product when the product is having a fault or a problem, and understand that what improvements in a cyclic loop are needed for the product, right? So that's where smart products come in, right? So everything, again, I'm making that statement just to double click on this, right? We talk about a lot of consumer data. Of course, India is a human-centric country with population as one big driving force for any change, right? For the quick companies to come in. But even from machines, right? Everything is getting connected, right? So the Internet of Things principle is that everything has an internet today, and that is connected, and you can use the data. It's as simple as that, right? Do you know that by 2025 in the world, IoT itself, or connecting things or machines or sensors, is going to generate 80 zettabytes of data? I'm sure that you don't know what a zettabyte is. A zettabyte is a 1 billion terabyte, right? So 80 billion terabytes of data is going to be generated only by things that are going to get connected, which are things that you use, machines that help our manufacturing and things like that, right? And the things that we invest in, at Honeywell, of course, data is the key for all the decisions that we take. In fact, we have our own version of GPT, which helps, it's called Honeywell GPT, which is internally used by all employees to not only take sensitive information, but keep it in the internet and then ask for questions, ask for better queries, ask for better solutions, and ask for better methods. But one example that I'll give you, which is something that I work on a day-to-day basis, is called fault diagnostics, right? So now when you put a product out there on a machine out there, right, you have to really understand when is it failing or why was a fault occurring, right? And that is what data can really look at. For example, if suddenly you're sitting in this room and you start feeling uncomfortable, right? You would say that, oh, the temperature doesn't seem right, right? So you would just call the facilities guy and say that, okay, looks like the AC has some problem. Because that's your human intuition, right? But for us, who's controlling this building, we are a building automation leader, right? We will have to look at, oh, is there a problem in that base unit that you're looking at? Or is it problem in the water supply? Or is it problem in the chiller? Or is it a problem in the air handling unit? Or has the sensor gone faulty? Or if the sensor, everything is working fine, maybe the communication layer has broken, or things like that, right? So those are, that is where data at every point, sensor at every point of the ecosystem of how this building is governed will come in to tell you that what the problem is, right? And what will it do? It will help that man that you call to solve that problem take a smarter decision and solve that problem sooner, right? So while we are reading data for the machines, but it is making the man who is operating the machine smarter, right? So that's the power, I would say, of behavioral analytics when you intersect it from not only from men and consumer, but also from machine, material, and processes, and intersect it with making smarter men and smarter decisions with data. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think by now we have some amount of understanding what we are talking about, right? That behavioral aspect of it. Now, let me open it up a bit and what we went through last couple of years. So just to tell you that definitely being an IIM Shillong, I know that being in a government institute, so-called, right? So it's not that we are also not means pivoting on data. So just to give you one instance of it, maybe I'm letting some secrets out. The CAT exams have just been over, right? So just to let you this, that we also rigorously follow an algorithm. So for those guys who are already there in the hall, but for the other guys who are maybe waiting to be in the hall, right? So we get close to 3 lakhs applications every year, right? And after first round of filtering, we bring it down to 30,000, 30K. And thereafter, finally, as you know, those people that is close to around 5.5 or some 6,000 people who actually get a call for an interview. So that's the level of filtering that you are doing. And mind you, it's not, no, it's Mary Marji kind of a thing. It's all data driven, right? And we have all these parameters in place as well as the external scenario. Now, where actually we are actually using data, just to give you a further insight, right, is that when you go to your center, be it Kolkata or Delhi or Bangalore or Mumbai or something, right, the panelists are waiting in one room and the people who have been called, I think you will share the experience, you are supposed to wait in another room. And if you recall that you must have got an SMS or a text message that you have been allotted panel number 6. Now let me tell you, we also, the panelists also received at the same point of time. And how it happens is this, because we feed all your profiles into the system and accordingly the panelists are chosen by the algorithm so that we have the best closest fit of experts will be there as part of your examiner. So it is not done, we are basically very much data driven there itself, right? So it's a very, very scientific process, right? So just to let you know that maybe we are not, our IoTs are not talking to each other, but we do have something in place. Okay, so one thing that we came across, and some of you would like to get rid of that tag, is basically something known as the COVID batch, right? Okay, because when we sit on the other side of the table, right, sometimes we said, okay, fine, what did you do in this class? What did you do in this course? So, you know, sir, this was in the second year of COVID and we could not attend any class. So immediately we discuss among ourselves, ye COVID batch banda hai, right? So during that COVID period, even though everything was shut down, so I was undertaking a project, right? My question goes to, I think, Mr. George, right? So I was doing some project for the ride-sharing industry. Particularly, I was studying Ola and Uber. So it was a pandemic, right? And you know this, that a huge number of families actually depend on this. If you travel in any of the metros, you will find that you talk to the cab driver, right, and try to get an understanding. You will find that how much they depend on Olas and Ubers for their livelihood. So I'd like to know from him that what is the strategy that they have adopted to actually coming to the human side of it, as far as Uber is concerned, when it comes to supporting the families, right, during the pandemic. Again, maybe the data might have given some interesting facts to them. That will be interesting to know. Yeah.
That's a pretty good question, Professor. So one of the things that we get to know, like as I said, okay, I'll connect it with something I said earlier. So for any marketplace based model to be successful, every party in the marketplace should be successful at their respective levels. Right, it cannot be a sort of a global maxima or something if you try optimization algorithm. So each individual party in a marketplace should be successful. So as professor said, like, when we have certain external shocks, like, COVID is an external shock. When you have external shock, what tend to happen is one or other party in a marketplace can be impacted by that external shock, right? So as a marketplace governance or a marketplace facilitator, as Uber or Ola likes to call themselves, it is the responsibility of the marketplace facilitator to make sure that you are doing certain interventions to make sure that the party which is getting impacted the most by an external shock, which is COVID in this case, can be taken care of, right? So that is the strategy. Now, how do we do it? Different organizations can have different approach on how do we sort of address this. But this is the fundamental approach. Now, the best part for a company like Uber is, since we are a very data-driven company, we have details into our core business, which is ride sharing in this case. We get to know what is the sort of, the average income that a driver partner would earn, what is that which he or she would be required to, continue sustaining the same sort of, livelihood that he or she has, and what is that the competitor can potentially provide, and what is the income that he or she can get from an alternate source of employment that he or she can take, right? These are certain data points that we would have because we track trip and earnings at that particular granularity. And whenever in case of COVID again, whenever we see a dip that, okay, whatever a particular driver partner is earning is not sustainable, we make sure that we do interventions by working out what would be the ideal fare in that particular scenario. And that's when, like, if you look into concepts like surge, there's a concept which has been discussed and brainstormed quite a lot. There are numerous factors which goes into surge algorithms. Like, it's not one or two factors, right? And the advantage of having this numerous factors into surge is, we could control the marketplace and we could make sure that we are facilitating it or moving it in a direction so that the party who is being hit by an external stimuli is being compensated fairly even in that particular scenario. So those are some sort of internal interventions we do, particularly when it comes to external factors that impact the marketplace players.
Interesting. So I was doing some studies with this with these drivers actually. So I get to know a lot of these human aspect of it. It's not only cutting edge IT that we are talking about, right? So at the end of the day, as I said, that here in IIM Shillong, we stands for sustainability, and sustainability for them is not simply the greenwashing, right? When you're driving a business, you need to ensure the profitability as well, right? So that takes me to Dr. Agarwal. Actually, the next question is that typically during this your pandemic season, right, given all these externalities that play a role in pharma industries, this the huge the game that goes on there, right? There are a lot of multinational players, and Dr. Reddy's have been really doing very well, right? So what has been their strategy to actually allocate adequate number of pharma medicines as well as vaccines during this pandemic period? Because let me tell you that I've been in consultation with some person from the Planning Commission, which is right now with the Niti Aayog, who was heading the government's group of secretaries for this. What can be the policy for the rollout of the vaccines? So if you recall that initially during when the severe phase, what we have is that we had the rollout of the COVID app, right? So you had to install that app, you have to book your slot. If you're getting a slot, go to the nearest center, get yourself vaccinated, right? But was it actually solving this? And is there not a role of these companies, right, who have been doing well or who have some kind of responsibility towards the citizens? So how did actually is there some insights which are coming, how to roll out the medicines, how to roll out the vaccines, right? Because there are different categories of countries, developing countries, third world countries, people who cannot afford a 2 square meals, right? So how is Dr. Reddy's responding to it?
So this is a bit of a fragile and a touchy topic for Dr. Reddy's, and I'll tell you why. Because during COVID, we partnered with Russia and we decided to launch a COVID vaccine called Sputnik in India. Perhaps, and at that point in time, I wasn't employed with Dr. Reddy's, and I myself got Sputnik, as a vaccine, because belonging to the data field, did my own research only to discover and find that Sputnik was by and large one of the most effective COVID vaccines available in the market. But then when we tied up with Russian government for supply of Sputnik in India, we actually ran into several challenges, and which included geopolitical challenges as well. That was one. Given we've got presence in 65 countries, North America is one of the biggest market, and there was pressure from American government to discontinue or disengage with Russian government. That was the first part. The second is as maybe as an outcome, we did not get the right support from local government or government of India, where we have imported a lot of doses, and we also wanted to localize the manufacturing. But given the time and the constraint of the raw material, we couldn't do it. And as an outcome, even today, if you look at how many citizens in India got administered with Sputnik vaccine, even the awareness is fairly limited versus that of Covaxin or Covishield. But at the same time, there were several other vaccines which were required specifically for patients who were admitted in hospitals. There were vaccines for improving the lung function, as an example. And then at a later stage, there were conversations about a possible fungal infection in lung because of admission in the hospitals as an outcome of side effects of COVID. So we did fairly well in for what was there within our control, in our gift, to actually supply the right volume of vaccines to the hospitals. That's the second part. But then there is an important lesson around this, which is to ensure that your supply chain is fully equipped to ensure that you can meet demands during a crisis. That's the first part. And beyond a crisis situation, even if you are operating in a normal environment, how do you make sure that your supply chain is robust, which does not lead to a crisis situation? And this is where data comes into play, and plays an important role for us. And I'll give you a very simple example. Every hospital, would need a simple, I would say, supply of glucose, as and that's by and large one of the most consumed, I would say, medicine in majority of hospitals. Now, every company, a lot of companies manufacture glucose, dosage as well. And let's say if Dr. Reddy's is tasked to supply 1 million bottles of glucose to hospitals in northern part of the country. We need to make sure that we are adequately staffed to even produce 1 million bottles of glucose. We need to make sure we are sourcing the raw materials from the right vendor. We need to make sure the quality of the raw material is right so that it doesn't fail in the QA test. We need to make sure the glucose, once it's manufactured, is distributed in a right and a balanced manner. We need to also make sure the price point is balanced. One of the biggest challenges that a lot of pharmaceutical companies face is price erosion. Being a generic drug, as an example, glucose, it doesn't really need an FDA approval because it's not a new drug. There could be 10 competitors. For a bottle of glucose, random example, which I may be selling to the hospital for 100 rupees, there's a high probability that my competitor may launch the same price with the same quality, with the same level of acumen of distribution for 90 rupees. That means the demand for my product will significantly go down. And you never know, 6 months down the line, the price erodes to such an extent, and it actually happens that for a medicine which was selling on the shelf a value of 100 rupees, over the horizons of 1 year, the shelf value has come down to 20 rupees. Now, what that means is, that's where we need to take a collective decision as an organization based on data. Can we really sustain producing that medicine? Or do we simply stop manufacturing it and let our competitors continue with the market share? Or there could be another possibility which we do is, we may acquire a brand providing similar vaccine by our competitor. And this is also done. So as an example, if Cipla is manufacturing a similar drug for pulmonology, we are also manufacturing a similar drug. Effects are the same. Basis the data, what is more profitable outcome, we will make that decision. The third and last point I would like to add is, I think consumer analytics or behavioral analytics can make and break an organization. And I can draw an example from one of the organizations I worked before Dr. Reddy's, which is NatWest or Royal Bank of Scotland. In India, NatWest is more known as a brand which people would have normally seen on the jersey of English cricket team, right? And this is the famous NatWest trophy when Saurav Ganguly pulled off his T-shirt and waved at the Lords. So I worked for that organization for 8 years. And there was a point in time when RBS made a reverse acquisition. Now, what do you mean by reverse acquisition? RBS acquired NatWest. The reverse acquisition was in a sense that RBS had revenues of 500 million. They ended up acquiring NatWest with the revenue of 2 billion pounds. So, because they felt that they can actually sustain. And once they made that acquisition, they almost went bankrupt to an extent that they had to be bailed out by the government of UK for a huge sum of money. Over the horizon of 3 years, what they discovered was RBS eventually emerged as one of the most hated brands in the UK. Because the citizens of UK felt that this bank is now being run by the taxpayers' money because the government of UK bailed that bank out. Having said that, even though NatWest was acquired by RBS, it continued to enjoy loyalty of British consumers because the brand affiliation was so strong. And when RBS did this consumer behavior study, they only looked at what could make this collaboration successful. To an extent, they ended up coming up with 3 key targets, or rather one key statement for them to be successful, which was to be number 1 in customer service, trust and advocacy. They never had a target of to be highest profitable or to increase the margins by X percentage. And they were able to spin it around only to decide that they actually had to get rid of Royal Bank of Scotland as a name, and they subsumed RBS under NatWest. Today, you will only see NatWest as a brand, and RBS may be a small bank operating particularly in Scotland. That's how it is. So this is where the power of customer analytics or behavioral analytics will come into play, because as customers, we also need to look at behavioral analytics is an engagement which originates from each one of us. How we are engaging with the brand, how we are engaging with the product, how we are engaging with the service. Good and bad, today the social media is highly impulsive. Now, and I'm so sure you would have seen a lot of articles on LinkedIn or Insta. Even if there's a slight error on Zeptos or Blinkits of the world, the netizens actually just blow it out of proportion. And Uber has been into the coverage for all right and wrong reasons. There've been people talking about Uber offering variable prices basis the battery levels of the phone, variable prices if you're running an iOS versus an Android, etc., etc. But I think what really is important for organizations to understand is whether they need to react or they need to respond. A lot of organizations today react. And then there are huge case studies around organizations which just couldn't understand the changing consumer behavior patterns. And I'm so sure you would have read of case studies of companies like Blockbuster, which eventually died. Kodak as an example, they weren't able to understand the consumer sentiments. And they've all operated at a point in time when they had no competition. Nokia as an example, Pioneer, BlackBerry, if they understood the pulse and the behavior patterns of consumer, they would have still continued, the market leading, position. That's an input from me.
That's a fairly good summation. This is how this company responded. See, there are 2 ways of looking at it when you look at any emergency or pandemic, right? So basically, one is whether you can look at it as the glass half empty or half full. So I basically am a proponent of looking at the glass half full rather than half empty. And what I feel is that what that pandemic has given to us is basically a thing called digital resilience, right? And that is where your automation plays a lot of role. So I would like to put this to you, right? And trying to understand that how maybe given those situations that we used to find ourselves in, maybe if we can talk about one incidence when this Honeywell went out of its, this normal went out its way to actually put up this digital resilience in place so that the business goes on. So I think right now, what I find herein is this, that whether you can see this, what's happening in Delhi NCR, right? So AQI going above, they say, okay, fine, it is 700 or maybe 900. It may be the case, the scale is not beyond 1000. So had the scale in beyond 1000, it would have been something else more than that, right? So Supreme Court has to step in. and saying, okay, fine, don't expose these children to the schools and all, rather let them be at home, right? And let teaching going on, right? So how we are pretty comfortable with this, putting it on a Zoom or a class 2 guy. He can put it on the Teams, right? He can do the class for the entire day. We are having all this kind of a thing. So coming to that, so that the digital resilience that it has given to the world. So how do you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll answer it from Honeywell, but from a personal level also, it actually resonates quite a bit. In fact, one of the viral articles I wrote during LinkedIn was on digital resilience and why defense is the best form of attack during such times, right? And I correlated it again to sport, to Rahul Dravid, and looked at how in certain times organizations need to respond and not react, exactly as Dr. Anish mentioned, right? In terms of, I think understanding change or understanding an external stimuli, every organization, I think, did a fabulous job in COVID, right? I think the digital resilience for organizations and even education institutes like ours started from day one of COVID when there was lockdown and all of that, and everybody was so resilient to suddenly start a work from home model for industrial companies, which was never heard of, right? For colleges running remotely for COVID batches, as you refer, right? I think, at my previous organization, at the current organization as well, physical labs were shifted into people's homes within 2 days across the country, right? Because the work could not stop. You still had to deliver the promise to the customer, more so now because, for example, at Dr. Reddy's, the supply chain equation became very, very important. And we are one of the largest sensor providers, right? The trackers of logistics or condition monitoring sensors or things that tell you whether your supply chain is or your material is being maintained at the right temperature or the right condition or things like that, right? So for us, we had to really at Honeywell scale up a lot of these businesses, right? The second thing that Honeywell did was, from a resilience point of view, looked at some of our businesses and looked at how could it help the community in such an equation, right, or such a situation, right? One of the businesses that Honeywell drives is PPE, which is plant protection equipment. And from that point of view, we make a lot of masks. We make a lot of respiratory protection systems for doctors and frontline workers. And overnight and over a few months, we set up lines like crazy in a jiffy to be able to meet the mask requirements of a lot of industrial workers, a lot of frontline workers, made special equipments like breathing equipments for doctors, which are called SCBAs, the suits that they wear, the PPE kits that they wear, and things like that. In fact, it was a business which was pretty stable and stagnant, but we saw a big business spike that was maybe an added advantage. But the purpose behind it really was that how do you make sure that you respond to what is going on in the market, and how as a company, which is a Fortune 100 company across the globe, could respond to that crisis and things like that, right? So that was one example of how you act and respond in such times to make sure that your sustainability, business sustainability needs go hand in hand of what is the need of the hour and what are the things that are going on, right? In terms of the other digital resilience, right, as from an automation perspective, I think what companies have realized over COVID is that automation is only increasing by the day, right? And it is getting more and more digitized, right? So the intersection of automation and digitization is something that has really picked up post-COVID, right? In terms of the entire building automation or industrial automation now relying on a lot more data, and for us to be able to do things remotely, right? In India, labor is cheap. So people feel, hey, we don't want remote, access or things like that. So if for example, I sell IoT platforms on building automation, right? And I tell them that, hey, there's an operator who's a diploma pass, right? Who earns, a certain salary, but is not as educated as the tool he's using. The building automation tool is very, very complex, right? So why don't you let experts govern it from the back end and remotely drive changes? So, imagine a smart home automatically changing conditions based on ambient behavior and things like that, right? But the biggest resistance we get in a market like India is that, I have a person who's there on site, right? let him do that. We don't really trust systems to be able to do it remotely on their own, right? But this equation has started to change now with resilience coming in, with people relying on fail-safe approaches to making sure that there are backups in everything that we do. There is reliability in every operation that we drive, and every smallest thing has to be as resilient and as reliable as possible. So those are few things that from a resilience point of view, I would say industrial companies did to respond and to make processes and systems more efficient. Yeah.
Fine. So with that, I think we can open it up to the audience before we can give 5 minutes to each, so that they can do a crystal gazing as to give us a thought that where is it that pharma industry is going and how data continues to play, and similarly for Uber and Honeywell. But if we have any questions, because we are running short of time, we can take 4 to 5 questions from the audience. Limited to 5 questions only.
Hello, thank you for the very insightful session. My name is Subiksha Sudhakar. So I'm interested in cybersecurity. I'm also writing blogs on that. So my question would be based on cybersecurity. We are listening to news about data breaches every other day. And data breaches is something that also breaks the trust of the consumers. So what does your company do in order to secure yourself from data breaches?
Maybe very specific. Who are you addressing?
In general, all of them. I just want to know the cybersecurity posture that they have to maintain their data.
I think maybe George, you may answer, because security for Uber is very important.
Yeah. No, so that's a pretty good question in this age, right? Because it's an age and time that we live in where pretty much all of our data is exposed, and even like I was pretty late. Very recently I was reading through a news article which spoke about the quantum of fraud that happens because of this data leak. So cybersecurity as such is something which is extremely important. And for a company like Uber, or for that matter for any tech company, there are certain systems in place when it comes to making sure our data is protected. And there are 2 ways of looking at it, right? Like one is there are company level systems, and then for certain countries there are country defined rules. Like if you go to EMEA, there is GDPR and such guidelines which we have to sort of adhere to. So on the company level systems, what Uber tends to do is we hold huge amount of data, and these databases are classified in such a way that the access to these databases are restricted based upon what exactly is required for a particular individual to do his or her job, right? And that's I do not exactly recollect the term, so there's something like minimal sort of access that would be needed, only that would be permitted. And you have like row wise sort of data encryption, and the access is limited to that extreme extent that even for internal employees, if you have to sort of seek access to certain data points, that goes through a very rigorous sort of a security approval process, right? And particularly in certain countries where there are certain stringent data regulations that exist, we work very closely with the government as well as the legal departments, internal departments and governments, to decide what should be the data security strategy for that particular company. And data security involves not just safeguarding the data, it also involves what data do you collect, right? Because companies now can collect pretty much any data about you, but we make sure as a company that we collect the data which is only required for our operations and do not go beyond that particular purview. And this varies from region to region based upon their regulatory body as well as the sort of the legal laws that exist for that particular country.
And maybe just to add, right, my perspective is we can split the overall security as subject into 2 categories. One is data security, which is internal to an organization. And the second is cyber security, which is more external facing threat. Now, just to add what George also said, From an internal security standpoint, there are guardrails in place which are like RLS, which is role level security, and then RBAC, which is role based access control. So if my role, despite whatever seniority I am in, if my role doesn't permit me to have access of salary information of colleagues across the organization, I will not have access to that because there's no need. And similarly, let's say I may need salary information only for colleagues who fall under my domain. So in that case, the role level security comes into play. I will only have access to top 10 rows which has information about my team members. That's the first part. For external security, there are a number of simulations that we conduct in partnership with third parties. As an example, there's something called red teaming exercise, where these external agencies, they act as hackers and they try to penetrate within a network. And if at all they're able to penetrate, that's what gets reported, and we then try to mitigate that, remediate that particular breach, because we know it's more of a, cosmetic or a synthetic simulation that we have done. Similarly, whenever we onboard any new third-party application, so something as simple as, let's say we decided to have Zoom as our collaboration tool, there's something called PT, which is penetration testing. Let's say if anything goes wrong with Zoom, someone tries to penetrate Zoom's network, because Zoom's got a gateway to our network, what could be that risk of data breach? So these are few of the controls that organization, this is not just centric to, I'll be honest, with Reddy's, but today almost every organization has this sort of a templatized guard-rated framework which protects from these cyber incidents.
I'll just add one line on a lighter note. If you had to start a startup, just take the third dimension, which didn't get mentioned, which is AI security, which is now beyond cyber security, which is coming up. So with all the Gen AI trends coming up, I think there's going to be a lot of investor money in AI security. So think about that. How can you enhance and read about it? I can go on a little bit, but then we don't have time. So Sir mentioned a lot about cyber security, taking it to the next level with AI and all the open AI algorithms. How do organizations protect against that threat? Is a big field that is coming up from a technology perspective. And I think as young MBA graduates, you should definitely be aware of it.
Hello, sir. I'm Utkarsh. First of all, thank you to the panel for such an insightful session. My question is directed to George Joseph, sir. So, sir, you talked about A/B testing. So I actually wanted to know what are the basic challenges that you face during case creations, and also in A/B testing, how do you segment users to account for the various behavioral patterns or demographic patterns, especially in a country like India, which is quite diverse in nature and which changes the diversity changes a lot. Thank you.
Thanks. So there's two specific questions in here. One is with regards to the A/B testing. So as I said, for any sort of product changes or policy changes, etc., we go through a stringent A/B testing or an experimentation process. So with regards to challenges for this, the first and foremost for any such test is to determine what is going to be your primary metric. So your primary metric is the metric that you expect to change when you are giving an intervention into your system. And it is extremely important that you define the right primary metric, because sometimes what happens is, when you try to do a particular A/B testing, you see a metric moving in a positive direction, but it can have a repercussion on something else. Like say, for example, I can improve my customer experience by paying out more refunds and appeasements, but then it will impact my profitability. Right, my support cost or my refund and appeasement cost would increase. So it's extremely important that you're looking at both sides of the picture when defining the primary metric, which is the fundamental, important aspect that comes to play. Second is make sure that you have the right guardrails in place, because A/B testing you cannot, conduct for a longer duration if any of your guardrail metric reaches a particular threshold, because it would have even if you're launching it for a 2% or a 10% population, it would have very, negative repercussions in the market. So make sure that you get the right primary metric in place and you get the right guardrails in place. Then it goes into stats, right? It goes into the entire sort of, statistical methodology to determine your right sample size, what is the lift, what should be the power of your experiment. There's quite a lot which, we might not have time for it. So there's quite a lot which comes on the stats domain with the statistical analysis that goes behind. So TLDR, what I'm trying to say is make sure that you define the right primary and guardrail metrics before you go ahead with any A/B experiment, and that is the major aspect when it comes to any A/B experiment. Can you just come again with the second question?
So, sir, my second question was that in India, like, there's a lot of diversity, right?
Oh.
So, like, how do you account for the behavioral and demographic patterns that exist? And how A/B testing is done to account for these patterns?
Yeah. So diversity really helps, right? So when it comes to any segmentation process, segmentation process would be really helpful if you have diversity in your population, right? And that's when you can create, standalone segments, or you can create segments where, the between group variations are as maximum as possible, right? So diversity does help in segmentation. Now, how do you segment or how do you segment your customer group base? Now, the parameters which goes into segmentation is dependent upon what specifically the business is trying to achieve, right? You would want to sort of invest in a particular sort of a market for a particular segment, and each segment is defined by a number of factors, and these factors are what you believe can help you to sort of drive a long-term movement in any of the KPIs that you have. So segmentation factors varies quite a lot between markets and what is the exact business outcome that the business is trying to drive. So connecting that to A/B test, even when we go for a segmentation, we make sure that we segment it, and for that particular segmented user group, we call it as a treatment group, we go through a separate treatment and make sure that whatever is being anticipated as outcome from that particular treatment is being achieved. If it's not, then probably our segmentation algorithm is not right. We would have to sort of revisit and add more factors or change more factors in the segmentation process. Okay. Sorry? No, I think, of course, the panel can share more, but I believe there are pros and cons in everything, right? So ChatGPT, I understand that, it definitely would be used extensively within academy, and there is this heated debate which is happening, right? Even your research papers can probably, build with ChatGPT. I've seen a research paper which has been built entirely by, GPT, right? So, and if research papers can be built, then why not students use it for their project? So there is this entire heated argument on the pros and cons. I believe there is pro to it. Like even the ChatGPT batch, if you're making sure that you understand the fundamentals and you are trying to use ChatGPT to sort of simplify the sort of the heavy lift or the huge associated works that comes around it, there is definitely merit in it. But make sure that you understand the fundamentals, that tomorrow if there is no ChatGPT, you should still be able to do the job, right? And if that is the case, and if you have that level of confidence, then I don't see a harm in sort of taking ChatGPT's work sort of help, even if it at work or even in academy or the project space. In COVID batch, if I try to compare COVID batch, I do understand that we've had people come in organizations, and the beauty of MBA, I was having this conversation with Manan earlier. So beauty of MBA is you get to interact with peers, and you learn quite a lot from peers, and that's the biggest gain that you will have after the end of 2 years, and that's what COVID batch tend to mix. But that's something that they can always pick up over a period of time, right? They can get back to corporate, be more social, interact with people, learn from others. If they do it, then definitely they could catch up to it. So there are pros. That it's just how do you sort of tweak yourself based on the scenario. That's what defines. Yeah, sorry.
And maybe, this is a very right example. If you were to ask this question, you said COVID versus Gen AI batch. If you were to draw a comparison from an academic standpoint versus a professional, right? So academic, I would say there is less of comparison, more of a differential. There's a difference between a COVID batch versus Gen AI. I would prefer the COVID batch because the cohort of students actually had to witness a forced disruption, something that was never taught to anyone, and they still, emerged successfully. personally, when I'm interviewing, candidates, I am a bit resistant or hesitant to, accept professionals during the COVID period, because what had really happened during COVID was people made, immediate job hops in over the horizon of 4 months, 6 months, 9 months. So as an example, someone who was actually drawing a salary, and this is a real example, someone who was actually drawing a salary of 6 lakhs per annum, over the horizon of 1 year, trust me, that person actually was sitting at 27 to 30 lakhs. Because everything was remote, people, and there were companies who wanted to finish their hiring, people frequently hop jobs. So this is again one of the examples of behavioral analytics, where from behavioral standpoint, I would be resistant to hire a professional for the COVID period.
And just one small quip again on the end. Whatever makes you smarter is great. Whatever makes you dumber is not good. So if you can use technology for the right purposes to make sure that you and your assignments are smarter, great. But if it is, barring your learning and your ability to think, it's not good, right? As students, you should look at using tools to, be smarter than your professors sometimes, but use it in that, limit and controlled environment. And I think that's that becomes great.
Yeah, thank you very much. So we are coming to the flag end of it. So basically we want to know what's there for our future as well. So maybe in just 2 to 3 minutes, all of you, each one of you can just give a crystal gazing, right? Just talk about where do you foresee the things moving as far as your industry is concerned in the next 5 to 10 years.
Sure. I mean, I'll take it from an industry perspective, not from a company perspective, because we are crystal gazing, cannot be limited to a company. But I think while we keep talking about data, digital transformation and all of that, I think the biggest change that is coming everywhere is software, right? Industrial companies are rebranding themselves as software, companies. If you look at automotive companies today, there are news that Nissan may go bankrupt, or there may be companies which may not survive the change and disruption, while the Teslas of the world are really ruling the roost. And if you look at the technology really driving there, typically an automotive vehicle always had different controllers, right? Today, the biggest trend in automotive today is not autonomous or EV, it's actually something called a software-defined vehicle. So how a software controller can control the entire vehicle or the entire plant or entire ecosystem is what the change is. So if as young MBAs, I think my crystal gaze for all of you is that don't ever coming out of this college say that, hey, I am a sales guy. I'm not a technology guy. Technology is the underlying changing principle that will define your roles and future, and value creation will always happen at intersection of technology with something else. Technology with a domain, technology with a functional skill, technology with an industry or things like that. So please make sure that never ever you say that I'm not an engineer, I'm not a technologist, I don't understand data, I don't understand technology, because without that there's no future. And more so with software and data, because that is going to really drive the change as we go ahead here.
I'll speak for both my industry as well as for the role, as Manan said. So industry, in the ride-sharing industry, it's definitely it's robocars. So if you travel to San Francisco today, there is this company called Waymo, wherein you can have a self-driven car. They have an app. We have integrated with Uber in certain cities, but if you use their app, you could actually travel on a like driverless vehicle, right? Who thought it's gonna happen like 10 years? And this is definitely gonna grow, and many of the cities might have driverless cars, so that's gonna be the biggest disruption as such from the technology space. But specifically, what's gonna be important for each of you is to understand how roles evolve. And Manan exactly pointed out the change that is happening. You need to have a technology background irrespective of wherever you go, right? As very rightly pointed out, be it sales, marketing, operations, product, like whatever be the domain that you are moving into, it is gonna be extremely important that you also understand the tech behind it, because over a period of time, the entire sort of demarcation or the line, if at all it exists at this point, between business and tech is gonna be more and more less rigid. So as individuals, we need to train ourselves so that we could multi-hat and we could sort of be able to handle a techno business role. And I think that's gonna be the change in role that is happening. even with GPT, Chat GPT, it's gonna help quite a lot on the business side. So just make sure that you are evolving as professionals with dual capability, which is gonna help you in the long run.
So for pharma, I would say there could be four things. The first is, most importantly, the R&D, which is AI-enabled drug discovery, because it has capability to significantly reduce overall turnaround time. In a way, we can actually offer drugs for end use. That's the first part. The second is using data. Pharma companies can actually significantly improve regulatory compliance. The third is because the AI-led drug discovery can cut short on the overall turnaround of clinical trials, it will have a direct impact on the price point. So affordability of the medicines is the third important aspect. And the fourth and most important is ease of access. Even if a drug is affordable, how do we make sure the drug is accessible? And this is an important conversation for countries like Africa, as an example, rural areas of countries like India even. How do we make sure the pivotal drugs are accessible? So these four are the key from pharma standpoint. Back to you.
Fine. Thank you. So that brings us to the end of this session. So I think a couple of takeaways. I think there are a lot of takeaways there. So we talked about that how the companies have been using data as a strategic resource to build their business process or strategy. And what makes my life easier as a faculty is that that we have a process that wherein we have to pitch for our specialization courses. Just on a lighter note, that, and I generally request the program chair to give me the last slot. The reason being, my faculties who were sitting there as well, right? So they keep on talking about that we are launching a course on marketing analytics. My faculty colleague from finance, he said we are launching a course on fintech. I said, see, everywhere, or you take HR, they talk about HR analytics. I just see the common thread there. Somebody is talking about tech, somebody is talking about analytics, somebody is talking about transformation. So you have it all. So please come to the IS area, right? So going forward, right, I think that there's no running away from tech, as I rightly said, that if you take this last 50 years as well, that when we used to have a dur dur tak koi nata nahi hai with tech and all. So now you will laugh at it when you find that any bank writing this, that we are a fully computerized branch. Right, so can you possibly think of any banking wherein there is no computerization? Similarly, you think of any business aspect of it, right? Be it HR, profiling, this, that, everything is AI driven, right? And as you rightly said, and my faculty colleague is very curious about it, that whether it's a chat GPT batch or COVID batch, I think give them a free hand. So that I generally do in my course. I give the student a free hand, jo kuch karna hai kar lo, internet is also open to you, right? But write my paper. Right? So with that mindset, I think we can close this session, and over to you guys.
As we draw this session to a close, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed panelists and moderator for their thoughtful input in this engaging discussion. I'm confident that this session has left all of us with an enriched knowledge that we can apply in our future endeavors. Thank you so much.
Before concluding, I request Professor Parjad Upadhyay sir to present mementos as a token of appreciation for our esteemed panelists. Once again, I thank everyone for their deep insights and look forward to host our panelists in our future discussions. Thank you, everyone.